Rain pelted the glass walls of the Lenox Tower as if the sky itself was trying to wash away the weight of the city below. Inside, at the very top floor, Ryan Lennox stood silent, his reflection blurred by raindrops. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned the city that had made him both rich and alone. At just 35, Ryan was already one of the most powerful names in the world of finance and real estate. A man whose empire spanned from coast to coast, built on strategy, risk, and a refusal to trust anyone. To him, love was just another distraction, a weakness that could tear down everything he had built. But tonight, that belief was about to be tested. Behind him, the polished surface of his desk gleamed under soft lights. A marriage contract sat waiting. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't personal. It was business. Cold, logical, and necessary. His board, his investors, they wanted stability. A married man, settled, less of a gamble in the eyes of the press and market analysts. Ryan hated the idea, but he hated losing more. That's when he found her Lily Hart. She wasn't from his world. No designer clothes, no family fortune, no hidden motives. Just a young woman trying to survive while caring for her ill father, struggling to hold on to the tiny bookstore her family had owned for generations. The very land Ryan needed for his next project. He could have forced the sale, but something about Lily's quiet strength, the way she'd looked him in the eye at their first meeting, refusing to be intimidated, it stopped him. And so, he offered her a deal. A marriage contract. 3 years, no real string, no promises beyond the business arrangement. He would save the bookstore, pay for her father's treatment, and in return, she'd stand by his side. The perfect wife for the cameras. It was simple, clean, and when the time was up, they'd walk away. No harm done, daughter, so he thought. A knock broke through his thoughts. His assistant entered quietly. Mr. Lennox, Miss Hart is here. Ryan straightened his tie, his face a mask of calm, though a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred beneath. Send her in. Lily stepped into the office, the storm's chill clinging to her coat. Her hair was damp at the edges, and she clutched her bag as though it were a lifeline. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard. Clear, steady, unafraid, she looked around the massive space, then met his gaze without flinching. Thank you for seeing me, she said softly, though her voice carried a strength that surprised even herself. Ryan gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Please sit. She lowered herself onto the leather seat, hands resting tensely in her lap. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm filled the silence between them, wind howling against the glass like a warning. You understand the terms? Ryan finally said, sliding the papers toward her. I do, Lily replied, and I agree, but only if my father gets the best care. No corners cut, no delays. His lips twitched at her resolve, almost a smile, but not quite. You have my word. Her hand hesitated over the pen. Then, with a breath, she signed, and as the ink dried, Ryan Lennox, the man who believed his heart was untouchable, felt the first crack in his armor, something he hadn't expected, a shift he couldn't name. They married quietly the next morning. No guests, no celebration, just the sterile formality of City Hall and a few lines recited out of duty rather than devotion. Ryan watched her as they stood side by side, her delicate fingers trembling as she slipped on the simple band. She wore no lace, no jewels, only a plain white dress that made her look almost ethereal against the gray of the stormy day, and when the clerk pronounced them husband and wife, Ryan felt nothing, or so he told himself. But as they left the building and stepped into the rain, something in Lily's soft, unguarded smile made him pause. For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to fade, and he saw not the woman bound to him by contract, but a soul, untouched by the harsh world he knew so well. He shook the thought away. This was business, nothing more. But deep down, Ryan Lennox sensed that nothing about this was going to go as planned. The rain had long stopped, but the storm inside Ryan's mind raged on. The papers were signed, the vows exchanged, and the deal sealed. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, something about the quiet presence of Lily in his life unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever had. She moved through his vast penthouse like sunlight breaking through steel clouds, gentle, unobtrusive, but impossible to ignore, and that terrified him, because Ryan Lennox had built his kingdom on control. But Lily, without trying, without saying much, was changing the air he breathed. It wasn't supposed to matter that she spent her mornings tending to the tiny plants she'd placed along the windowsills, or that she stayed up late reading books he'd long forgotten. He shouldn't have noticed the soft hum of her voice as she cooked herself simple meals, refusing the housekeeper's help. Yet he noticed everything, especially the way she never asked for more than what they'd agreed. No demands, no expectations, no questions about his business, his plans, his late-night calls, and that should have comforted him. But instead, it left him restless, because in the silence between them, he felt the weight of what he didn't understand, a kind of goodness he'd never known how to trust. One evening, he returned from a meeting, weary and irritable, after a day of battles over contracts and stock prices. He entered the apartment, expecting emptiness, but there she was, curled on the sofa with a book, the golden light of a lamp casting a soft halo around her. She looked up, startled at first, then offered a small, warm smile that caught him off guard. "You're home early," she said quietly. "Meetings. Wrapped up sooner than I thought," Ryan replied, loosening his tie, feeling awkward in his own space. "You must be tired," Lily said, closing her book. "I'll let you have some quiet." But as she rose to leave the room, Ryan found himself saying, "No, stay." The word surprised him as much as it did her. She hesitated, then sat down again, unsure. The silence stretched, and for the first time, Ryan struggled to fill it. "You like to read," he said finally, glancing at the worn novel in her hand. "I always have. Books make the world feel less lonely, I suppose," she answered, her gaze soft but steady. He didn't know what to say to that. Lonely. How could she feel lonely surrounded by luxury? But then, watching her, he realized all the wealth in the world meant nothing to someone who had only wanted safety, not riches. That night, as Ryan lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The memory of her smile, the gentleness in her voice, stayed with him like a melody he couldn't forget. And slowly, without meaning to, he began to see her, really see her, not as a contract, not as a solution to a business problem, but as a person, a woman who had given up her freedom to protect what she loved. Days passed, and that awareness grew. He found himself watching for her when he came home. He noticed how she always asked the staff how they were, how she offered kindness without thought of return. He began to hear the echoes of her laughter when she spoke softly to her father on the phone, promising him everything was fine, even when she was exhausted from worry. And the truth of it all hit him one evening when he arrived home and found her asleep in the library, the book fallen from her hands, the soft rise and fall of her breath the only sound in the room. He stood there, just watching her, realizing in that quiet moment how much she had come to mean to him, how much he wanted to protect her, not because of a contract but because she was the first person in his life who made him feel human again. But with that realization came fear, because Ryan Lennox had never let himself care before. And now, caring felt like standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing to catch him if he fell. And deep inside, he knew he was already falling. The sound of her laughter echoed softly through the grand apartment, and for a fleeting moment, Ryan paused in the doorway, unable to move. He hadn't meant to come home this early. He hadn't meant to find her like this, free, unguarded, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with the housekeeper's little dog in her lap, giggling as the tiny creature licked her fingers. It was the first time he'd seen her truly happy, and it startled him more than any business rival ever had. Because in that simple, innocent joy, she reminded him of everything he'd forgotten how to feel. He cleared his throat, and Lily looked up, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry I didn't hear you come in." Ryan shook his head, trying to force his usual mask back into place, but it felt heavier tonight. "Don't apologize. It's your home too." The words felt strange on his tongue, but Lily smiled at them, a smile so genuine that it made his chest tighten with something he refused to name. As she stood, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt, he noticed the softness in her eyes, the way she looked at him as if she saw past the suits, the power, the carefully constructed walls, and that terrified him, because no one had ever truly looked at him that way before. "I hope your meeting went well," she said gently. "Always kind, always thoughtful." It did. His answer was automatic, but his thoughts were far from business. He wanted to ask her to sit with him, to talk, to fill the silence that echoed louder each night when she retreated to her room and left him alone with the storm inside his mind. But he didn't. He didn't know how. Instead, he watched as she moved to the sink, rinsing her hands, humming a tune so soft he could barely hear it. And for the first time in years, Ryan Lennox wondered what it would be like to let someone in, to truly share his life instead of standing behind walls of steel and glass. That night, as rain began to fall once more, he found himself unable to sleep. He paced the apartment, restless, haunted by the sound of her laughter, by the way her eyes had met his, without judgment or expectation. He ended up in the library, where her book still lay on the armchair, a folded slip of paper tucked between its pages. On impulse, he opened it, and his breath caught at the sight of a list written in her delicate handwriting. "Things I hope for: Dad's health to improve, to feel safe again, to see the ocean at sunrise, to find kindness in unexpected places, to remember how to dream." Ryan stared at the words, feeling as though he'd stumbled upon a part of her soul she hadn't meant to reveal. And with each line, the fortress around his heart crumbled a little more. She wasn't here for wealth or status. She was here because she'd had no other choice, and still, she dared to hope for simple, beautiful things. The next morning, without really knowing why, Ryan made a call. By nightfall, Lily's father had been moved to one of the best private clinics in the city, his treatment upgraded, his care entrusted to a team of specialists. When Ryan told her, expecting perhaps a polite thank you, she surprised him. She didn't just thank him, she looked at him as though he'd given her the world, and in that moment, he realized he would do anything to see that look in her eyes again. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, the distance between them shrank. They shared quiet breakfasts, brief conversations about books, art, the simple things he'd long forgotten how to enjoy. and every time she smiled at him, something inside him softened, healed. But with that growing closeness came a new kind of fear, because Ryan Lennox, the man who believed he could control every part of his life, was falling in love. And love was the one thing he'd never been able to control. The soft glow of dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting delicate streaks of gold across the cold marble floors of Ryan's penthouse. But it wasn't the light that woke him that morning, it was the quiet sound of Lily's voice, carried faintly from the balcony. He hadn't even realized she'd stepped outside, yet there she was, wrapped in a thin sweater, her hair catching the first blush of sunrise as she spoke gently into her phone. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. The tenderness in her tone told him everything. She was speaking to her father, offering comfort, strength, hope, all the things Ryan had spent his life pretending he didn't need. For a long moment, he just stood there, hidden by the shadows of the room, watching her, and as he watched, the walls he'd built around himself felt thinner than ever. Every day since they'd married had chipped away at them, not with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but with the quiet power of who she was when no one else was looking. She turned then, as if sensing his gaze, and their eyes met through the glass. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by the softest smile. And in that instant, Ryan felt as if the sun itself had risen just for him. He stepped onto the balcony, the morning air cool against his skin. "You're up early," he said, his voice low, uncertain. "I couldn't sleep," Lily admitted, folding her arms as if to shield herself from more than just the cold. "I wanted to see the sunrise." Ryan glanced out at the horizon, where the city's harsh angles softened under the gentle light. He'd lived in this penthouse for years and had never once stepped outside at dawn to see this view. Not until now. Not until her. "It's beautiful," he said, but he wasn't looking at the skyline. He was looking at her. She blushed faintly, turning away, but he caught the glimmer of wonder in her eyes, the way the morning seemed to fill her with quiet hope, and something inside him shifted again, a realization so sudden it left him breathless. He didn't want this to end. He didn't want the contract to run its course, the distance to return, the walls to go back up. He wanted this her, in his life, not as part of a deal, but as part of himself. But he didn't know how to say it. He didn't know how to bridge the gap between what they'd agreed and what his heart now begged him to admit. Over the following days, that sunrise moment stayed with him. He found himself drawn to her presence in ways he couldn't explain. The sound of her laughter as she tried to teach the housekeeper's dog a new trick. The sight of her curled up with a book in the library. The simple grace with which she moved through the world. He began to join her on those balcony mornings, silently at first, then with small conversations about the view, the day ahead, anything to keep her near. But as his feelings deepened, so did his fear, because Ryan Lennox didn't believe he deserved this kind of peace. He didn't believe someone like Lily could ever truly love someone like him. Not once she saw all his flaws, his mistakes, the hardness that had kept him safe for so long. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, the city shimmering with lights beneath a velvet sky. Ryan returned home from a long meeting, expecting to find the apartment quiet. Instead, he heard music, soft, gentle, a melody that tugged at memories he'd buried. Following the sound, he found Lily in the library, swaying slowly to the music, lost in the moment, unaware of his presence. And for the first time in his life, Ryan didn't think about contracts or consequences. He thought only of the woman in front of him, and how desperately he wanted to be part of her world. He stepped forward, and when she saw him, surprise flickered across her face, followed by something else, something that made his heart race. Without thinking, he held out his hand. "May I?" For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a smile that made the city's lights pale in comparison, she placed her hand in his dot, and as they danced, slowly, quietly, in the middle of the library, Ryan Lennox knew he was no longer falling. He had already fallen completely, irrevocably, in love with the woman who had walked into his life as part of a contract, and had instead rewritten his heart. The city was alive beneath them, a sea of shimmering lights and endless motion, but all Ryan could see, all he could feel, was Lily's hand in his. The quiet dance they'd shared that night in the library haunted him in the most unexpected way. It had been nothing more than a few minutes, a single song, a few slow steps, yet it had shaken the foundation of everything he thought he understood about himself. There was no contract that could explain what he felt, no clause that could protect him from the truth he now faced. He loved her, deeply, fiercely, and in a way that terrified him more than any business risk ever had. But love, he realized, was not so easily declared, not for a man like him, whose life had been shaped by caution and control. How could he tell her what was in his heart when he wasn't even sure he deserved the chance? Every morning, he watched her from across the breakfast table, longing to speak, but the words remained locked inside, silenced by fear. And every night, he lay awake, replaying the moments they shared, wondering if she felt the same pull, the same impossible hope. Then came the evening that changed the course of everything. Ryan had arranged for Lily's father to receive a new, experimental treatment, a gesture he tried to convince himself was purely practical. But when the call came from the doctor that night, telling him how well the first session had gone, he felt something more than relief. He felt joy, real, unfiltered joy, because it meant so much to her. Unable to resist, he walked down the hallway to the room she'd made her own. The door was open a crack, and through it, he saw her kneeling by the window, her face lifted to the stars, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She didn't hear him approach. She was lost in her prayer of gratitude, whispering words of thanks not for herself, but for her father's health, for the kindness of strangers, for blessings she hadn't expected. And Ryan stood there, heart pounding, overwhelmed by how pure, how selfless, how breathtakingly beautiful she was. He couldn't stay silent any longer. "Lily," he said softly. Stepping into the room, she turned, startled, quickly wiping at her tears. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You never need to apologize." For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the city's glow casting gentle patterns across the walls. And then Ryan crossed the room, his heart racing faster with each step. He stopped just in front of her, unsure how to begin, afraid of saying too much or too little. But she waited, patient, as she always was, giving him space to find the words. "I need you to know something," he began, his voice low, hesitant. "When I asked you to marry me in that way, it was never supposed to become this. I thought I could keep it simple business. No feelings, no risk. But you've changed everything." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. She let him go on. "I see you, Lily, every day. The way you care for people, the way you find joy in the smallest things, the way you make this place feel like a home. I thought I didn't need that. I thought I didn't need anyone. But I was wrong. I do. I need you." The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them. And then, slowly, Lily reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek in a gesture so tender it nearly undid him. "I was afraid to," she whispered, "afraid this was all pretend, afraid I'd fall for you and it wouldn't matter, but it does. It always did." And in that moment, Ryan felt as if the world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them, standing together at the edge of something vast and real. He gathered her into his arms, not out of duty or obligation, but because he couldn't do anything else. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him grounded, and in truth she was. But even as joy bloomed between them, a new challenge awaited, one that neither of them could have predicted. Because love, as they were about to discover, is not just about finding each other. It's about fighting to stay together, no matter what storms may come. And as dawn broke over the city once more, Ryan Lennox knew with absolute certainty he was ready to fight for her. For them, for the life they were building one sunrise at a time. The morning after their hearts finally spoke the truth. The world outside seemed brighter, as if the city itself had taken a breath alongside them. But Ryan knew that love wasn't a finish line. It was the beginning of a journey he'd never dared to take before. And deep inside, as he held Lily's hand during breakfast, he sensed that the real test was yet to come. Because life, like business, never moved without challenges. And love, real love, demanded more than whispered confessions and quiet promises. It demanded courage. That courage was called upon sooner than either of them expected. It started with a phone call, a simple ring that shattered the peaceful morning. Ryan answered, his voice calm at first, but his expression darkened as he listened. The words from the other end hit him harder than any market crash. His company, his empire, was under threat. A rival he had once trusted had been plotting in the shadows, setting traps, manipulating contracts, and now, with a single strike, was trying to take it all. Ryan hung up and for a moment said nothing. Lily watched him, worry clouding her gentle eyes. He wanted to hide it, shield her from the storm he felt rising. But when he looked at her, he realized something. She wasn't a delicate flower needing protection. She was his partner, the one person he could trust. He told her everything about the betrayal, the risks, the danger to everything he had built. He expected fear, maybe even regret. But instead, Lily reached for his hand and said, in that steady, unshakable voice that had drawn him to her from the start, "We'll face it together." And those words became his anchor. The days that followed were some of the hardest of his life. Lawsuits, media attacks, boardroom battles. It felt as if the walls of his empire were crumbling around him. But this time, Ryan didn't face it alone. Lily was there at his side. She sat with him through endless strategy meetings, offered ideas that surprised even his top advisors, and reminded him in moments when he doubted himself of the man he could be, not just the one the world expected. Late one night, after a brutal meeting, Ryan found her in his office, studying papers by the soft light of a lamp. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and exhaustion shadowed her face. But her eyes still shone with determination. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "So should you," she replied, looking up at him with a small smile. "But I'm not leaving you to fight this alone." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, the weight of everything he'd hidden for so long spilling out in that single sentence. But Lily shook her head, her gaze fierce and full of love. "Yes, you do. You always did. You just had to believe it." And in that moment, Ryan realized she was right. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about standing together when everything else fell apart. It was about choosing each other, over and over, no matter how hard the road became. In the end, they won. The rivals' schemes unraveled, exposed for all to see. Ryan's company weathered the storm, stronger for the trial. But more than that, Ryan himself emerged stronger. Because for the first time, he'd let someone see all of him, not just the powerful CEO, but the man behind the mask. And Lily had chosen him anyway. Their contract had started as a business arrangement, meant to last 3 years. But as Ryan stood beside Lily, watching the sunrise from their balcony, he knew one thing for certain. He didn't want a contract. He didn't want conditions or terms. He wanted forever. And with all the courage he'd learned from loving her, he turned to her and said the words that had once terrified him, but now felt like the simplest truth. Marry me again, Lily, not for business. Not for anyone else, just for us. And when she said yes, with tears in her eyes and joy in her heart, Ryan Lennox finally understood. Love was never a weakness. It was the greatest strength he'd ever known. And with Lily at his side, he was ready to face whatever the future held together, always.